Welcome to the Rusted Garden Homestead. This video is all about tomatoes. I'm going to give you a bunch of tips, talk about all kinds of different issues and things that can come up with your tomato plants. And I'm going to really cover a lot, so maybe watch this a couple of times. It'll give you some ideas of how to grow tomato plants in your garden. Let's start with a couple of basics. Tomato plants, when you're starting them as seedlings, you're going to see some purpling along the stem and on the undersides of leaves. Now these are a little bit dirty because we had a crazy rain last night and it just splashed up a lot of dirt. So purpling can be normal when it's on the stem and when it's on the undersides of the leaves, and it can vary depending on the variety of plant that you're growing. Now here's a bunch of tomatoes that I let the fertilizer run out, and you're going to start to see purpling that's more veining, yellowing leaves, and then just purpling that looks splotchy. That is a problem when you have a nutrient deficiency. So this plant has not been well fertilized with N, P, and K, and you can just start seeing how the leaves yellow, the green pales becomes yellow, and purpling patterns are going to change and be veiny. Here's a good example of how it looks veiny right through there. This plant needs a water-soluble fertilizer. And this was an experiment just to show you what it looks like. Now, the flip side is if you over-fertilize these small cells and even your plants in the garden, giving them too much Epsom salt, too much fertilizer, they can start to discolor like this because they're over-fertilized. So you have to make a decision. If your plants look nice and green, this is nice and healthy, it was fertilized when it was put in a hole, the planting hole, and it's given a water-soluble fertilizer at planting, and again later down the line I'll talk about that. Don't overdo it, just let your plants go. Slow and low fertilizing and feeding. You're also going to see sometimes on your stems of your tomato plants, they're going to be sending out roots along here. That's not a disease. They'll get really bumpy looking, like right in here. That's just because a tomato is a vine and it wants to send out roots, and because we were having so much rain, there's a lot of water staying around here and it's naturally sending out roots. They would, if this tomato plant fell over, these roots would go right into the ground. That brings me to the second point. I don't know, maybe third point. Your tomatoes, your plants are going to have a lot of surface roots. These are surface roots, and these were kind of exposed last night when the rain came and splashed a lot out. You're also going to have roots that grow from the bottom. So the roots here will go deep into the ground. The roots on the surface will spread across the entire surface and look for nutrients and water. So when you do a top dressing and you throw fertilizer down, worm castings, compost, the roots that spread out across the top are going to be picking all that up. The roots down here will go into the earth. They'll find nutrients too. They'll go deeper, be able to pull in water, nutrients. But you have two levels. You got the top level and you got the level at depth. And why is that important? Let's talk about blossom end rot. That's when you have a tomato, the bottom turns brown where the blossom is, the bottom of the tomato, and the tomato browns out. That can be a calcium issue, but it's not usually due to a lack of calcium in your garden. You can put in some lime, you can put in pulverized eggshells, you can make sure you have calcium in your soil, and there's an emergency treatment I use too if your container plants have an issue. But blossom end rot is primarily caused by a watering issue. It's when the water, when you water your plants, they do fine. When you don't water your plants, the roots dry out. When the roots dry out, they have a hard time pulling in the calcium into their plant system, and blossom end rot can develop. So it's not really because there's a lack of calcium. It could be. It's really due to a lack of even watering. If you water them too much, sometimes you see fruit crack. That can be an issue. But you have to keep your tomato plants nice and moist with even watering. And mulching will help do that wonderfully. If you just put in an inch of mulch, shredded hardwood, you could use grass clippings. We'll keep the water in right here. These surface roots will take in plenty of water. You're not going to get blossom end rot. It'll be very rare for your garden not to have calcium in it. Alright, so those are a couple main things about feeding and blossom end rot. Right in here I have a 4x8 raised bed. I have 2, 4, 6 tomato plants, spacing anywhere from 2 to 2.5 feet. That's pretty standard. When you're planting in a space like this, you want to make sure there is room in between and around for air to flow through. That helps manage diseases and just helps keep the plants healthier. It's also easier for spraying. One of the things I recommend is as your tomato is growing up, this is going to need to be staked. Take off some of the leaves from the bottom and also mulch. Mulch, we already said, helps with keeping the moisture even, keeping your plant watered, keeping everything going nice with the tomato system and moisture. But it also helps to keep diseases from splashing up on the undersides of your leaves. And the best thing to do is to really start removing a couple of leaves from down low. I'll do that in future videos. So that you cut this off, remove it, and you start building a gap between the ground and the upper leaves of your tomato plant. Now you don't want to come in for a plant this size and take leaves off all the way up to here. It'll shock it. Just take off a couple. As it grows a little more, take off a couple more, and you want like a 10 or 12 inch gap down here eventually. You do this primarily with indeterminate tomatoes. We'll talk about the difference between indeterminates and determinates in a second. You can see in there I have some tomatoes starting. When you see your tomatoes start to form like that, that's when I give them a water-soluble feeding. Water-soluble means the plant leaves, the root systems can immediately take in the nitrogen, the phosphorus, the potassium. You can use any water-soluble fertilizer that you want. Just give them a quick drink and a quick pour around there, and that just helps the tomato plant continue to grow and establish, healthy fruit. Alright, so you have the indeterminate tomato, like this one is, tomato plant. This will continue to grow and grow and grow and can get 6, 7, 8 feet tall. It'll continue to put shoots out the sides, and it will continue to flower and produce fruit over the entire season. That's the indeterminate variety. You have determinate varieties, something like that one, where the plant will get to a set height, starts flowering. All the flowers tend to come at the same time. The fruit produces quickly all together, and then the plant dies out. It doesn't actually 100% die out, but it dies back. You could take cuttings from it and put them in water. The cuttings will root, you can replant. Or you can cut the tomato plant back and it will come back again in about a month or so. That's when you give it a big drink of nitrogen fertilizer, and your determinate varieties will often send up new shoots and restart. But the determinate varieties tend to flower generally all at once, produce fruit, and die back. Your indeterminate varieties just keep growing like really a crazy vine. This will have to be staked up. Staking is a good idea, again, for disease management, and a stake is going to go right in there, and I'll start putting that, tying it straight up there, straight up the stake. Now, when you plant a tomato, you want to dig a basic hole. I don't want to get crazy with this. Dig the hole, make sure it's nice and loose soil. I throw in some peat moss to loosen the soil, give it the soil a material that will hold water. That's peat moss. Call it a material, call it matter. It's not nutritious. It doesn't have any N, P, and K in it. Peat moss only serves as an amendment to your soil to really hold moisture and loosen up your soil. So I would put in like 1 or 2 shovelfuls of peat moss, really fix the hole up. In there, 2 or 3 tablespoons of any organic fertilizer that you want. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. Don't go crazy about it. Something around a 5, 5, 5 N, P, and K. Those numbers, when you see 5, that means it's 5% nitrogen. If the next number is 5, that means 5% phosphorus. And then the next 5 means 5% potassium. So a 5, 5, 5 is 5% nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Sometimes you'll see a 2, 6, 3. That means it's 2% nitrogen, 6% of another, 3% of another. Don't go worrying about the numbers. Just look for something around a 5, 5, 5. When we plant this tomato, I like to plant it plant the stem about a third deep into the hole or to a half deep. So you could plant it just like this if my hand was the soil. And surface roots will come out through here. Your roots down here will be deeper in the ground. Or a third. and this will just help the tomato plant really establish in the planting hole. Once you plant it, you can give it a drink of a water-soluble fertilizer that day and let it go for a couple of weeks. You could add in worm castings, you could add in compost, but basically the idea is just to prepare a nice loose planting hole with some fertilizer in it. Drains well. Peat moss will hold moisture. You could use cocoa coir. That will hold moisture. If you have a lot of compost, you can use compost. That will hold a lot of moisture. That really sets your plants up to establish, get off to a great start, and do really well. So here's one design. 4x8 raised bed, 6 tomato plants, 2 to 3 feet apart. You could probably fit 8 plants in here. Instead of tomatoes, I put peppers in here. And this is a great way to have, you know, tomato plants in your garden. Mulch it. We'll stake it later in future videos. They'll do really well. Now, you can also do this. You don't need a fancy raised bed. You don't need to spend money on a raised bed. You can just use a simple earth bed. I'll be doing a video on this. And I basically removed the grass, flipped it over, put it right down the middle. On top of that, I put on my topsoil that I had dropped off here. It's 50% topsoil, 50% leaf grow, and you just make a mound. On top of here is leaf grow compost sprinkled across the top. And these plants are set 1 foot apart. Now they differ in the other garden as there's no plants on either side. So I'm going to put a stake, well, probably 3 stakes right down the middle, put some string along there, and I'm going to weave the tomato plants up there. That will support them as they grow. There's going to be outstanding airflow down this way, outstanding airflow down this way, and that's why we can plant them closer like this. This is almost like a tomato hedge. Airflow will be coming around, dry the leaves, help the plants deal with fungus and things that establish on the leaf, like moisture and spread. So this is one method that you can, this is one way that you can grow your tomato plants. You can also put them into a raised bed like this and just do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, a little bit closer together. But I'm not going to have any tomato plants to the right. Circulation will be what am I trying to say? The circulation of air around the tomato plants spaced out this way will really help them not get diseases on the leaves. It also makes it easier to come in and spray the tomatoes from either side. But you can see how well they're doing. And these were put in, I don't know, maybe 7 or 10 days ago. And they were set up just like I said. Dug a nice deep hole, tossed in some peat moss, a couple tablespoons of organic fertilizer, gave them a drink of water-soluble fertilizer, and you can just see how green they are, how nicely they're growing. You don't have to overlove your vegetable plants. Too much fertilizer will cause a problem and they will get harmed. Again, look at the growth right here. Just dug the hole, the peat moss, some organic fertilizer, compost on top, water-soluble fertilizer, and you see nice growth in there, nice green color. And then you let them go. You might be tempted to come in every week, keep giving them soluble fertilizers over and over again. You don't want to do that. You'll get excessive leaf growth, which are inviting to aphids and other insects, and it can cause a problem. Slow and steady fertilizing. I think I'll leave it at that. Hope you enjoyed the video. It gives you some ideas of how to get tomato plants established in your garden. I have a lot of videos on it. I'll link a bunch of different videos I did last year on growing tomato plants. But please subscribe because I will be going over the entire process: staking, pruning, disease management, and sprays. Please check out my seed shop at therustedgarden.com. Thanks for watching.